The blood of a freshly slaughtered calf spreads across the stone floor of a Florentine tannery as a parchmenter's blade works with practiced precision, separating the hide from muscle and sinew. This is March 1348, and in the workshops scattered throughout Tuscany, craftsmen have no way of knowing that within weeks, their world will be shattered by a catastrophe unlike anything in living memory. But today, the work continues as it has for generations. The transformation of raw animal hide into the luminous surface that will carry sacred words and brilliant images for centuries to come. The calf's skin arrives still warm at the vellum maker's workshop in the early morning hours. The parchmenter examines the hide carefully, running calloused fingers across its surface, searching for scars or imperfections that might mar the finished product. A single calf skin of exceptional quality will yield only 3 or 4 medium sheets of vellum, precious material that commands a price worthy of the labor that creates it. The craftsman plunges the hide into a large wooden vat filled with a caustic mixture of lime and water, beginning a process that will take weeks to complete. The lime solution attacks the hair follicles and softens the tough fibers of the skin, preparing it for the brutal scraping that lies ahead. Days pass as the hide soaks in its alkaline bath, the lime slowly working its chemical magic beneath the surface. The parchmenter checks the vat regularly, testing the skin's readiness with experienced hands. When the moment arrives, workers haul the heavy sodden hide from the solution and drape it across a massive wooden frame. This is the stretching rack, and it will be the skin's home for the next several weeks as it transforms from raw animal matter into a surface fit for the Word of God. The scraping begins immediately. Using a curved blade called a lunellum, the parchmenter attacks the outer surface of the hide, removing every trace of hair and the thin outer layer of skin. The motion is rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Stroke after stroke, the blade biting into the wet membrane and sending pale curls of organic matter dropping to the workshop floor. On the other side of the skin, the worker must remove the remaining flesh and fat, scraping until only the pure dermis remains. This is exhausting work, requiring both strength and delicacy. Too much pressure will pierce the skin and ruin days of labor, while too little will leave imperfections that no amount of later processing can remove. As the days pass, the skin slowly dries under tension on its frame. The stretching continues as the material shrinks, the parchmenter periodically adjusting the pegs that hold the hide taut. The process of wetting and drying repeats multiple times, each cycle creating greater tension in the material and producing the smooth, drum-tight surface that makes vellum so prized for writing. Between cycles, the lunellum returns, scraping away any remaining imperfections, thinning the material to a uniform thickness across its entire surface. The final preparation requires the finest touch. Ground pumice, obtained from volcanic deposits, is applied to the surface of the nearly finished vellum. Workers rub this abrasive powder in circular motions, removing the natural grease from the skin and creating a slightly rough texture that will accept ink and pigment. Some workshops use cuttlefish bone for this purpose, while others prefer gum sandarak. Each material leaves its own subtle character on the finished surface. A solution of lime or chalk whitens the material, transforming the natural yellowish color of animal skin into the creamy white that illuminators prize. In a scriptorium attached to a monastery on the hills overlooking Florence, a young monk watches his master prepare for the day's work. The room is small by later standards, with a single window positioned to catch the northern light, bright enough to work by, but cool enough to prevent the vellum from warping in the heat. The scriptorium is not the grand hall that later ages will imagine, but a modest space where the miracle of book production unfolds one page at a time. The Lindisfarne Gospels themselves were produced by a single monk, working in conditions far more primitive than this, perhaps even on a windswept island with no proper workshop at all. The scribe's first task is preparing his quill. He selects a feather from his store of goose primaries, examining the shaft for strength and flexibility. Goose feathers are the standard choice for most scribal work. They are readily available and produce a fine, consistent line. Swan feathers are superior but expensive, reserved for the most prestigious commissions. The scribe strips away the plume and barbs from the underside of the feather, creating the streamlined writing instrument that will rest comfortably in his hand for hours at a time. He places the stripped feather upright in a container of hot sand. The heat strengthens the barrel of the quill and renders it more flexible and durable. A properly cured quill can write thousands of words before it needs resharpening. After cooling, the scribe carefully removes the outer membrane and the soft pith within the barrel. Then comes the cutting, a precise operation that will determine the character of every letter he writes. Using a sharp knife, he slices the tip at an angle and cuts a small slit in the hollow, creating a reservoir that will hold ink and allow it to flow smoothly onto the page. The ink itself is another marvel of medieval craft. In a corner of the workshop, a small pot contains the concentrated essence of oak galls, those strange round growths that form when a gall wasp lays her egg on an oak tree. Instead of an acorn, the tree produces these hard, tannin-rich balls, which medieval scribes discovered centuries ago contained the key ingredient for permanent black ink. The scribe collected his galls in autumn, when they contain the highest concentration of tannic acid. The recipe is ancient and requires patience. The galls must be crushed and soaked in water. Some recipes call for rainwater, others for vinegar. The mixture sits for days or even weeks, stirred occasionally, as the water slowly extracts the tannic acid from the powdered galls. The liquid turns pale brown at first, then gradually darkens as more of the active compound dissolves. A recipe from 1483, preserved in archives, lists the 4 essential ingredients: oak galls, copperas, gum arabic, and water. Copperas, ferrous sulfate, known also as iron vitriol, provides the crucial chemical reaction. When dissolved in water and added to the oak gall extract, it instantly creates black ink. The scribe watches the transformation with satisfaction, seeing the pale brown liquid turn dark as the iron bonds with the tannic acid. Gum arabic, harvested from acacia trees, serves as a binder that helps the ink flow smoothly and adhere permanently to the vellum. Without it, the pigment would sit loosely on the surface, vulnerable to smudging and flaking. The finished ink requires aging. It must be left for a couple of weeks, stirred periodically, then strained through fine muslin to remove any particles that might clog the quill. The scribe's supply represents weeks of careful preparation, and he guards it jealously. In some scriptoria, the ink recipe itself is a closely held secret, passed down from master to apprentice over generations. Across Tuscany in these months before catastrophe, other craftsmen labor at the spectacular art of illumination. The booksellers of Florence, the cartolai, run busy workshops that coordinate the complex process of manuscript production. They commission the vellum, hire the scribes, and entrust the decoration of their volumes to outside painters and professional illuminators. A single manuscript might pass through a dozen hands before completion, each craftsman adding their specialized skill to the growing work. The illuminator's palette contains colors that seem to glow with inner light. The most precious is ultramarine blue, made from lapis lazuli, mined in distant Afghanistan. Its very name means beyond the sea, a reference to the impossible distance this pigment traveled to reach Italian workshops. Ultramarine costs more than any other color except gold itself, and illuminators use it sparingly, reserving it for the Virgin's robes or the most sacred elements of their compositions. The pigment requires complex processing to extract the pure blue from the rocky matrix of the lapis, a technique that involves mixing the ground mineral with wax and kneading it repeatedly in lye to draw out the color. For everyday blue, illuminators turn to azurite, a copper carbonate mineral that produces a slightly greener shade. Vermilion provides brilliant red, made by grinding cinnabar ore, mercury sulfide, imported from Spanish mines. The finest cinnabar required intensive grinding. The more finely ground, the more intense the color. By the 14th century, vermilion could also be produced synthetically, making this essential color more widely available. Lead white provides highlights and is mixed with other pigments to create lighter tints. Malachite, another copper mineral, yields green, while organic dyes extracted from plants and insects create yellows and additional reds. But gold is the ultimate goal of illumination, the element that transforms a decorated manuscript into a truly illuminated one. The word itself comes from the Latin illuminare, meaning to light up, and nothing lights up a page like precious metal. Gold arrives at the workshop in sheets so thin they are translucent, beaten by specialist craftsmen until a single coin has expanded into hundreds of square inches of gold leaf. These delicate sheets tear at the slightest touch and will drift away on a breath of air. The illuminator cannot simply brush gold onto the page. First, he must prepare a raised foundation using gesso, a mixture of white pigment like chalk or gypsum, water and glue. This foundation gives the gold a three-dimensional quality and allows it to catch light from every direction. The gesso must be applied precisely, allowed to dry, then moistened again just before the gold leaf is laid. The illuminator lifts the fragile sheet with a broad brush, lowers it onto the tacky surface, and presses gently. A smooth stone, or even a hound's tooth, burnishes the gold to a mirror finish. Gold must always be applied before any colored pigments. The precious metal has an unfortunate tendency to adhere to any paint already on the page, ruining careful work. So the illuminator plans his sequence carefully, blocking out all the areas that will receive gold before touching his brushes to any other color. Only when all the gilding is complete does he begin the intricate work of painting miniatures, borders, and decorated letters. In Siena, the workshops attached to the great cathedral produce some of the finest illuminated manuscripts in Italy. The cathedral's scriptorium and its associated artists have developed a distinctive style that blends Italian tradition with French Gothic influences. The painter Ambrogio Lorenzetti, whose frescoes of good and bad government adorn the walls of the Palazzo Pubblico, represents the height of Sienese artistic achievement. He and his brother Pietro have created works of stunning beauty and technical sophistication throughout the city. Neither brother can know, as they work in their studios in the spring of 1348, that both will be dead before the year ends. The plague arrives in Tuscany through the port cities. Ships carry more than merchandise in their holds. They carry infected rats, and the fleas that feed on those rats carry the Bacillus Yersinia pestis. The disease spreads with terrifying speed. In Florence, the first cases appear in spring, and by summer the city is in the grip of an epidemic unlike anything in living memory. The writer Giovanni Boccaccio will later describe what he witnessed. Victims developed swellings called gavoccioli in the groin or armpit, some as large as apples. From these points, the deadly bubo spread throughout the body. Black or ash-colored spots appeared on the arms and thighs, and anyone who showed these marks was certain to die. The social order collapses. The traditional authority of law, both human and divine, degrades almost completely as those who should administer justice fall sick or die. Servants who might care for the sick demand impossibly high wages and perform their duties poorly. Many of these caregivers die themselves, along with whatever payments they hoped to earn. The bonds of family dissolve as parents abandon children, and children flee from parents. No woman, regardless of her birth or status, can refuse to be tended by any man who offers help, young or old. The death toll defies comprehension. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. Consecrated ground runs out, and workers dig massive trenches where hundreds of corpses are laid in rows, covered with a thin layer of earth, then more bodies stacked on top. Boccaccio estimates that between March and July, more than 100,000 people die within the walls of Florence alone, a number that seems impossible until one realizes how many the city held before the pestilence arrived. The countryside suffers equally, with peasants abandoning their fields to die in hovels or along roadsides. In the scriptoria and workshops, the work stops. Masters die, and their apprentices flee or follow them to the grave. The careful accumulation of knowledge, the techniques for making the finest vellum, the secrets of mixing lasting inks, the skills for laying gold in perfect luminous sheets, vanishes with the men and women who possessed it. Some workshops close forever. Others lose so many craftsmen that they can barely function when the worst of the plague passes. Siena suffers catastrophically. The city loses more than half its population, a blow from which it will never fully recover. Major projects halt, including the ambitious expansion of the Duomo that was meant to create the largest cathedral in Christendom. This expansion would never be completed. The government of the Nine, which had commissioned Lorenzetti's famous frescoes celebrating good governance, stumbles toward its own end. Traditional levels of patronage decline sharply, especially after 1355. Those artists who survive must travel far from home to find work. Ambrogio Lorenzetti's will survives from June 9, 1348. In it, he transfers all his possessions to a religious brotherhood, because he knows that he, his wife, and his 3 daughters may all die at any moment. No records of the painter exist after that date. He was almost certainly a victim of the plague. His brother Pietro disappears from the historical record at the same time, presumed dead from the same cause. The art that emerges from the plague years reflects the trauma. Art historian Millard Meese has documented substantial changes in Tuscan painting after 1348. A deep pessimism pervades the work, along with a return to stricter, more doctrinal religious expression. A panel by the painter Biondo, depicting Mary of the Apocalypse with saints, introduces imagery completely new to Tuscany. A decomposing corpse, covered with snakes and toads, appears in the predella. This memento mori, this reminder of death, would have been unthinkable in the confident, prosperous decades before the plague. Manuscript illumination absorbs these changes. A tiny image from a Tuscan manuscript, painted in the immediate aftermath, shows devils disguised almost as cherubs, murdering people below with bows and arrows. The arrows symbolize the Black Death itself, causing chaos and destruction among the people of Italy. This anonymous artist draws on biblical metaphors and classical mythology, but the emotional force comes directly from lived experience, or rather, from witnessing so much death that life itself seems fragile and brief. In the years that follow, the survivors slowly rebuild. New craftsmen must be trained to replace those who died. The techniques of vellum making, ink preparation, and illumination must be passed on to a new generation, often by masters who themselves learned hastily during the chaos. Some knowledge is lost forever, particular recipes, specialized skills, the accumulated wisdom of destroyed workshops. But the fundamental processes endure because they are too essential to civilization to be abandoned. A parchmenter in Florence returns to his workshop and finds his lime vats dried out, his stretching frames empty. He begins again, acquiring calfskins, mixing his solutions, starting the slow process of creating material worthy of sacred text. A scribe finds oak galls fallen from autumn trees and gathers them, crushing them and setting them to soak as his predecessors did for centuries before. An illuminator grinds his pigments, ultramarine for heavenly blue, vermilion for sacrificial red, gold leaf for divine light, and begins painting once more. The manuscripts produced in these recovery years carry the mark of their time. The colors seem deeper, the religious imagery more intense. Saints stare out from illuminated pages with eyes that have witnessed impossible suffering. The technical quality may be uneven. Some workshops have lost too much expertise to maintain earlier standards, but the emotional power is undeniable. These are works created by people who have seen the end of the world and somehow survived. The scriptoria that endure adapt to changed circumstances. The wealthy patrons who once commissioned elaborate devotional works are fewer now, their fortunes diminished, or their family lines extinguished. Some workshops specialize in liturgical choir books for cathedrals and monasteries, large format volumes with massive decorated initials visible from across a church. Others produce simpler works for a broader market, manuscripts that preserve essential texts without the elaborate decoration that requires expensive specialists. In Florence, the Cartolai continue their work of coordinating manuscript production. A century later, the bookseller Vespasiano da Bisticci will lead a thriving enterprise that builds some of the most impressive private libraries in Renaissance Italy. But that flourishing lies in the future. For now, in the years immediately following 1348, the goal is simply survival, keeping the old skills alive, training new craftsmen, producing enough books to meet the needs of a church desperate for spiritual consolation, and a population struggling to make sense of catastrophe. The vellum maker scrapes his hide, watching the pale curls of organic matter fall to the floor. The scribe trims his quill and tests it against a scrap of parchment, watching the ink flow smoothly from the sharpened tip. The illuminator breathes gently on his gold leaf, watching it settle onto the prepared gesso, then burnishes it to a mirror shine. These gestures have been repeated countless times before and will be repeated countless times again. The plague has taken half the population of Tuscany, destroyed families and fortunes, ended artistic movements and political regimes. But it has not destroyed the human impulse to create beauty, to preserve knowledge, to transform raw materials into objects of wonder. The manuscripts that survive from this period are testaments to resilience. Every page of vellum represents weeks of labor, from slaughter to stretching, to scraping, to finishing. Every line of text represents a scribe trained in the ancient discipline of letters, working hour after hour in dim northern light. Every illuminated initial represents an artist who has mastered the secrets of pigments and gold, who knows how to create the illusion of divine light on a surface of prepared animal skin. And behind all of this labor lies the shadow of 1348, the year that changed everything, the year that proved how fragile human achievement really is, and how determined humans are to rebuild what has been lost.